Hello and welcome to Curious Minds, my socially isolated friends. I'm right there with you. I'm on day 14 since I have made any human contact, which is kind of weird. It's kind of changing our perspective of humanity. It's kind of making us look at humans as though they're the cause of the disease, but as I shared about a week ago, we're going to find out that the human cause of the disease is also the human cure of the disease as they begin to find antibodies present in people who have overcome the disease. And this makes a striking parallel with the Christian gospel, as we find that the antidote to our disease is also found in the body of another human, the one human who could overcome the disease and had within himself the cure in his body, that being Jesus Christ, and this being Easter week. So, naturally, I want to cover the topic of Easter, of the resurrection. I'm calling the resurrection the central claim of the Christian faith. Why is it the central claim of the Christian faith? Because Paul said that without the resurrection, faith is useless. The followers of Jesus on the road to Emmaus were also completely despondent when Jesus was dead. They knew that a dead Savior was no Savior at all, and not until they realized the resurrection did the rest of Jesus' life seem to have any meaning. So an apologetics approach here, as is typical for curious minds, so also want to look at why people tend to reject the resurrection. And David Hume is probably the central piece on not just rejecting the resurrection, but rejecting miracles in general. Hume said, "No testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle, unless the testimony be of such a kind that its falsehood would be more miraculous than the fact which it endeavors to establish." Now, we might say it's more miraculous that these events happened and the resurrection didn't happen, that the resurrection did happen, but Hume favors the idea that a lie or a misleading is always more likely than a miracle. He, by default, rules out the possibility of miracles, or the likelihood, you might say, of miracles. So this leads him into some circular reasoning. He believes that miracles can't happen because they are by nature something very rare and unlikely. And if they're so rare and unlikely, the likelihood of a lie or being mistaken is always to be favored. But how does he come to this conclusion that it's unlikely? He has to believe that there's no intervening power that leads these miracles to take place. So in essence, he's saying miracles don't happen because God does not exist, and God does not exist because miracles don't happen. Completely circular. Well, are Christians guilty of circular reasoning if they say the resurrection did happen because, say, the Christian God is true, and we know the Christian God is true because the resurrection did happen? Well, that would be circular also. But the Christian approach doesn't have to be circular. Hume's approaches like that, need to be circular. And why is the Christian approach different and more exempt from circularity? Because the biggest miracle has already taken place. I'm talking about the creation. The creation itself demands that something outside of the natural has occurred, right? Nature can't be the cause of nature. The universe can't be the cause of the universe. It demands that something outside the universe, something supernatural, gave rise to the universe itself. So we can already know through this type of cosmological argument that there is some supernatural force that at least was operative in the beginning of the universe. Therefore, why would it be out of the question that a supernatural cause continues intervening in the universe? There is no logical deduction that would conclude that a continuing intervener into the universe could not operate. And if this is the case, ruling out miracles seems very unreasonable. And in fact, there are supernatural interventions that take place constantly. What am I talking about? I'm talking about human free will. See, if we're just the products of natural causes, and our brains operate completely according to natural cause and effect, nobody would be guilty of any wrongful action. They would only be doing what's natural to their brains and bodies, to the collocation of atoms, to the chemical reactions that could not be altered by anything outside the system. But if you're able to override a natural impulse, maybe you have a natural impulse to be violent or to act out sexually, do you have the ability to overcome that through your will, your wisdom? Of course. That's why we're held accountable for our actions, and that's why we also want credit for the positive actions that we do. And this free will can only happen if there is some intervening of the person into the natural realm. So in a sense, little miracles like this are happening all the time in all people. Now, Hume and others like him would call miracles rare by nature. Well, how do you know what's rare and what's not? How do you critique that? You could also argue that rare events are happening all the time. Every day is unique in some way. The orientation of the universe has never been what it is now. You've never been the exact person that you are today. Everything changes a little bit. Everything is rare. Rarity seems to be no reason to rule out whether an event could or could not happen. Now, Hume acts like he can determine the odds of a miracle taking place. But this could only be done if he's evaluating the situation naturalistically. But if God exists, if God is in the equation, what grounds does he have to say what the odds of an event are? You can't. When you have an intelligent, intentional agent, odds must be thrown out. Now let's say I have 100 dice before me here on the desk, and you walk in and you see that all the dice are facing 1. They've all been rolled to 1 somehow. You might say,
"Oh my gosh, that's incredible. What are the odds of that?" "Somewhere close to 1 in 10 to the 77th power.
Yeah, maybe, if you're looking at it naturalistically. And if I were to say, yeah, I just rolled all these dice and here they are, they all came out 1, you would say,
"Yeah, it's more likely that you're lying than that you actually rolled all 100 dice to number 1.
But if you were in the other room and I said, hey, all the dice are facing number 1, and you walked in and saw all the dice facing number 1, you probably wouldn't conclude that I rolled all the dice and just by happenstance they all got to number 1. You would probably say,
"Oh, well, you simply wanted to turn every dice to face number 1.
And I think you'd be right to think that. Now, what are the odds in this scenario of the dice facing number 1? Naturalistically, incredibly slim. But if there's an intelligent, intentional agent right there before the dice who sees fitting to orient them that way, what are the odds? You have no idea. If you have the ability and the will to do it, the odds approach 100%. All that to say that a miracle is not something unlikely by nature, as long as an intentional and able agent is working with the system. And as we've seen from the beginning of the universe, this agent is able to make physical changes into the natural realm. Now, that doesn't mean that all people should automatically believe every claim to a miracle, does it? And it doesn't mean that we should believe any and every claim to a life coming back from the dead, does it? We have to look at the reports. We have to look at the available evidence. And one of the things we can ask is, would there be a purpose for this intelligent agent to intervene in such a way? And that totally messes with the odds. So let's go to the reports. And I think we come across some very interesting things when we look at the reports of the resurrection. And one of the things I notice is that there are not reports to the contrary. Oh, sure, you have Gnostic Gospels coming many, many years later, but even these don't eliminate the 4 minimal facts, which we'll talk about in a moment. And what we have is not one source, as some opponents to the faith say. The Bible is not one source, and it only became one book nearly 300 years after the events. There are 8 or 9 sources to the New Testament alone. There are also some writings from historians that mention Jesus, and even that mention being put to death under Pilate. And there are also many writings at the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century. A lot of the church fathers wrote just continually on matters of theology. The movement spread quickly. You gotta wonder why, if the resurrection didn't actually happen. But here's what we have in the reports. There's 4 measures that we can use to test the reports and determine their honesty. 1, mundane facts. 2, the principle of embarrassment. 3, collusion versus differentiation. And 4, unpredictability versus contrived responses. And this morning I just looked at the last chapter in the book of John. Kind of a strange little chapter. John looks like it should maybe end after chapter 20, and then there's this additional report here. So just in this chapter, and there's many others you could go to, let's see what it says about these 4 measures of honesty: the mundane facts, the principle of embarrassment, collusion versus differentiation, which won't be relevant in this case, and unpredictability versus contrived responses. Okay, Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. Kind of a mundane fact. That's who there was. Could have been more spectacular by including more people. Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. Okay, a little bit of a principle of embarrassment there. They're not out doing things that are faithful to the cause of Christ. He's going fishing. They said to him, we'll also come with you. Okay, a little more embarrassment. They went out, got into the boat that night, and they caught nothing. Okay, major principle of embarrassment there. They're great fishermen. They caught nothing. When day was breaking, Jesus stood by the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Principle of embarrassment. It's their own Savior. They didn't know it was him. So Jesus said to them, "Children, you do not have any fish, do you?" Right? A little bit of embarrassment, a little bit of unpredictability on the response of Jesus. Couldn't he have said something a little more spectacular? They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you shall find a catch." Of course, they put their net in, they find the catch. And the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's the author of this gospel, John, he said to Peter, "It's the Lord." So when Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on. Okay, mundane fact. Peter put on his outer garment, threw himself into the sea. Also a little bit of a principle of embarrassment. Peter is acting on greater faith than John, the writer, is. Other disciples came in the little boat. They weren't far from land. They're about 100 yards away. Okay, mundane fact, 100 yards away, dragging in the full net of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid and fish placed on it. Okay, mundane fact. Apparently they didn't even need the fish. Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish which you've caught." Simon Peter went up, drew the net, full of fish, 153, okay? Mundane fact, 153 fish. Why include that? Why not round out the number? Who knows? By the way, the net wasn't torn. Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." Okay, a little bit of unpredictability. Why do we not have spectacular and ethereal sayings of Jesus at this moment? He's being very normal day to day with them. None of the disciples ventured to ask him, "Who are you?" knowing that it was the Lord. Move forward to the conversation with Peter. Jesus said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He asked him 3 times. Definite principle of unpredictability here with how Jesus responds. A little bit of a principle of embarrassment in the case of Simon Peter, because he doesn't love to the measure that Jesus is asking. Ahead in verse 18, Jesus tells Peter how he's going to die. Again, a little bit of unpredictability, a lack of spectacularness to it. If this is a contrived story, should sound a little more spectacular and heroic. Instead, it talks about Peter's blindness. Jesus asked Peter to follow him. Peter asks, what about this John guy? Jesus said, "If I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." This became a controversial saying among the disciples. If you're contriving a story, why contain a saying that could possibly cause controversy? Well, because Jesus actually said it. He actually had to go on and clarify what that saying meant so that people wouldn't read into it. So when you read carefully in these accounts, specifically these post-resurrection accounts, you detect mundane facts such as the 153 fish. You see principle of embarrassment where the disciples don't really demonstrate any radical faith. And there's unpredictability in the responses of Jesus, and there's a real lack of building up the disciples and over-complimenting them. Wouldn't these writers write themselves in as the heroes? But they don't do that. And one that I didn't touch on because it requires looking at several different accounts is collusion versus differentiation, another mark of honesty. See, in court, when you have 2 witnesses that say the exact same things from the exact same perspectives, that evidence is thrown out, and often those witnesses are seen as being guilty of collusion, maybe part of the crime because they've rehearsed exactly how they want to say their lie. On the other hand, sometimes in court you have complete differentiation, where one story contradicts the other. If this story took place, this other story could not have taken place. From opponents of Christianity, you have accusations of both. Oh, the authors just stole from each other. Oh, no, wait, no, they contradict each other. And there's this in-between zone that the Gospels strike between collusion and differentiation, so that it creates a balance to where the honest reporting between the 2 witnesses is different enough to where they certainly did not contrive the stories together. They are independent witnesses, but they're also not so different that there's irreconcilable differences. All that to say, the accounts about the resurrection, the Gospels at large and the resurrection in particular, are that they show every mark of honest reporting. We have no reason to think that they're not honest reporting. The disciples had nothing to gain by reporting the facts that they recorded. Yeah, but they gained power. Oh, did they? And what did they do with that power? Lost their jobs, risked their lives as they traveled around sharing the message? That's not what people do with power. That's what people do with a conviction. And why would they have this conviction when they had the opportunity to know for sure whether that conviction took place? Okay, on to the minimal facts approach. This is the one taken by some of the leading defenders of the resurrection in this day. Gary Habermas, William Lane Craig, Mike Licona, Lee Strobel. They tend to come back to this minimal facts approach, which has basically 4 minimal facts. 1, Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. 2, Jesus' tomb was found empty. 3, many people saw Jesus alive. And 4, his followers would die defending this belief. So, number 1, Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. How do we know that's the case? Well, I shared a couple weeks ago about the evidence for the death of Jesus as it relates to Islam. Go back and listen to that one if you want the fuller scope of it. But basically, Romans were professional crucifixioners. It's easy to tell when someone died on the cross. It was confirmed by the spear wound into his side. Nobody was expecting to be alive. There was no means by which Jesus could have been alive or come back to life in any naturalistic kind of sense. Yesterday, I mentioned to somebody that the spear wound itself may be enough to kill him. But what the spear wound did was likely pierce his heart, and the pericardium sac around the heart fills with water after death. This is known through medical science now, and possibly known by the Roman crucifixioners at that time. That confirmed his death. It did not kill him the rest of the way or anything like that. Blood and water came out via gravity, and they knew for sure that he was dead, and onlookers would have known probably for the last couple hours by that time that Jesus was dead. You need to push up on the cross with your legs to catch breaths. If he's not pushing up, he's not breathing. The lungs fill with water. You asphyxiate, and there are no signs of life. Jesus was dead. The tomb was found empty. Now, one of the most extreme cases of the principle of embarrassment is the fact that the women followers were going over there taking spices, believing him to be dead, and they find the tomb empty. And they're very disturbed by this. And what do they assume? Oh, he's risen from the dead. No, they assume they've taken his body somewhere. They know that they didn't go to the wrong tomb. And the guards had to make up a story of the missing body. If his body was just changed to a different tomb, couldn't they just say, hey, no, his body's over here? And they could save their hides and save their jobs by doing that. Instead, they contrive a story saying, yeah, the disciples, those violent, vile men, came and risked their lives before the guards so that they could take his body and rush out of there while neatly folding up some of his laundry in the tomb. That's unlikely. So what we have from even the opponents of the time is the idea that the body was stolen, implying, yeah, the tomb was empty. Now, many people saw Jesus alive. Again, principle of embarrassment, it's the women finding him alive after the resurrection. And a little bit of embarrassment there too. The first person to see him, Mary, assumed he was the gardener. Sir, if you've taken him somewhere, please let me know. Mary. And then she recognized him. Many other witnesses also saw him. Several of these occurrences are recorded. You have Jesus walking for a couple hours with the guys on the road to Emmaus. You have him appearing in the room with the disciples, a time without Thomas, and then later with Thomas. Actually, a full week in between, which must have been grueling for Thomas. Thomas said, unless I put my hands in his wounds, I won't believe it. It seems so unlikely. Jesus is not a ghost. They see him physically alive. He eats fish with them. Thomas goes up to him, physically puts his hands in the wounds, in Jesus' hands and his side, and says, my Lord and my God. Jesus doesn't correct that, by the way. And then, as recorded in 1 Corinthians 15, which is probably the earliest written resurrection account, written maybe around 50 AD by Paul the Apostle, he says, I'm passing on to you what I also received when I first believed. There's already a codified statement of this brief poetic description of the gospel. Christ died, was buried, he was seen by various disciples in this order, and then he was seen by 500, many of whom are still alive. Go talk to them. These witnesses want to tell you. 500 of them. Go find out for yourselves. Was it a hallucination? Can't be. Mass hallucinations don't happen. What they saw was real, and nobody could speak otherwise about it. They could just say they wanted to stop the movement, but they couldn't say that this resurrection didn't happen. They couldn't produce the body. But maybe the disciples just wanted to make this up to kind of push the teachings of Jesus, or push their own teachings even. Oh, really? There was nothing to gain for them in doing this. Any one of them could have been a well-meaning Jew and could have had their religious basket filled. But no, they had to oppose the majority of the people at the time and teach them, hey, Jesus is the fulfillment of your Jewish Messiah because of this. Without the resurrection, none of it would make much sense. The resurrection happened, therefore we have this belief. And they would give their lives for this belief, living and dying. Right? We usually focus on the fact that they would die for this belief. What about the fact that they completely lived for this belief? They gave away everything they knew to be able to travel around and share this message. And they would die for it too. And some people say, so what? They would die for it. People die for their beliefs all the time. Yeah, but this is different. This isn't dying for something that you believe in, something that you hope is true or something like that. This is dying for something that you know for sure whether you're lying about it or not. You're an eyewitness. And according to some of the resurrection research, I think from Josh McDowell, nobody in history has ever been known to die for what they knew to be a lie. You can die for what you believe in that happens to be a lie, like Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions or something like that, but nobody dies for what they know to be a lie. The disciples were in a unique position to know for sure whether Christ had actually risen from the dead, and they died defending this fact. That cements their conviction, and when this faith is useless without the resurrection, as Paul says, they would not have died for what they knew to be a useless fact. It wouldn't be worth defending. So why would they defend it? Why would they die for it when they knew whether it was worth defending or not? So the resurrection demonstrates a few things, and hopefully this is enough to make a decent case in the brief amount of time that I have. The resurrection demonstrates that Jesus is the Son of God, according to Romans 1:4. It's the means through which we are born again and given a living hope, according to 1 Peter 1:3. And the resurrection is the means by which we can speak confidently of heaven. Everybody wants to speak confidently of heaven. Everybody wants to act as though their loved ones by default go to heaven when they die. Why is this confidence present? It's because of the certainty of Jesus' resurrection and the promise that when we die in him, we likewise raise to life in him. Since he rose from the dead and shares that power with us, when we commit ourselves to him in life, through life, and in death, dying in a sense to ourselves, he also brings us to life. The same kind of life that he rightfully earned, that kind of resurrection. So consider the meaning of the resurrection and what it tells us about the nature of Christ, affirming all the things that he said about himself, and being the hope through which sinners can come to life. Now, as we're surrounded by news of new death totals every day, it takes on an interesting context, knowing that the greatest tragedy may not be the number of earthly deaths that take place, because everybody on this earth will die one day. The greatest tragedy is dying while rejecting that which brings you to life. So earthly death is not the end. That's what Jesus' resurrection proved. But those rejecting Christ will never get to share in that resurrection power. Death will have the final say on them. That's why I urge people to put their trust in Christ, not in anything of this world, not in your own power, but the one who's proven his power and proven his status through conquering death. So there you have it. Happy Easter, friends. We'll talk to you again soon. Enjoy your social isolation, and thank you for all you're doing to keep New Mexico safe in particular, and to really up the level of safety in the United States. It's pretty amazing what we're all doing together. We'll talk to you again soon. God bless and guide you.